Well, hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Life and Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm joined by the amazing, the inspiring, the wonderful Aled and Lou Cousins, formerly from King's Church, Hastings, but for the past 3 years, they and their family have been living in Southeast Asia in the Philippines, where they are involved in church planting and missions work. In the description to today's episode, you can find more information about Aled and Lou, including links where you'll be able to sign up to receive their regular emails and support them if that's something you feel led to do. For now, let me introduce Aled and Lou and invite them to share how it is that they felt God dislodged them in the first place and call them on mission. Enjoy. Hello, welcome to the podcast. It was really exciting for me this morning when Amy and I sat down to pray for the day to say, I'm going to the Philippines today. Of course, although I'm talking to you in the afternoon, it's 9:30 at night your time, and you said you're not normally up at this time. So I'll try not to keep you too long, but we are really excited to have you on the podcast and to hear some of your story, your journey over the past 3 years, what led you to make that decision. And so I guess as an overview, as an introduction, why don't you just introduce yourself to our listeners and what you've been doing for the past 3 years?
Yep. So I think, we've been married for the best part of nearly 18 years now. We've got 3 children. We were at King's Church, Hastings I've been there pretty much all my life. You moved there about 20 years ago. And so we were there as part of a family for all of that time. And then, like you said, 3 years ago, was when we made the move. So we arrived on the last day of December 2021, and we've been here ever since. So joined some friends of ours that have been here for nearly 10 years, Howard and Rosie, and they'd been doing lots of kind of mission things, so kind of feeding programs and education programs and different kinds of things. Had seen some real fruit, but they hadn't been doing church planting. In that sense, they were passing people on to other churches, and they felt really kind of challenged by God to actually let's start gathering these people and start planting church. Weren't quite sure how, and we, parallel to that, had kind of really gone on a journey, which I'm sure we'll share a bit more about. But it was kind of more one of, we know that God's calling us to go, but we're not quite sure where. So along those kind of conversations that we had with different people, those kind of two things dovetailed together really. So we came and we joined them, and we've been here for 3 years. So planting church, doing kind of missional things. So we've got some different programs going on here and meeting different needs here. That's kind of in a snapshot. That is
I appreciate that. It's just a snapshot. There's a lot around that, and I want you to kind of lead us through your journey and some of the things that God's shown you along the way. Because living in Hastings with 3 children, there's plenty of reasons not to go half the world away from the other side of the world and begin again a fresh life. And so why don't you start by just telling us how you came to make that decision in the first place, how you discerned a sense of call, and what led you to this kind of lifestyle of radical and faithful obedience.
Where did we start? It was just, I had a job cleaning, and I remember I had a really amazing season where I was really able to hear from God, and I started to just pick up my faith in terms of journeying with God and just hearing from him. And out of nowhere one day he said, I'm going to be moving you to a different nation. And I remember going back and saying that to Aled and us being like, okay, like, let's just sit with that. And then over the next, year and a half from that point, God aligned it so faithfully. But it was just like you had prophetic words. We just felt a stirring, didn't we?
I think the first thing to say is that when we got married, we said to each other, like, okay, we see ourselves in Hastings for the next 5-10 years, and we said that, Jez, like every single year. We would kind of review the year, look on ahead, pray for the year, and be like, yep, Hastings next 5-10 years. But it was probably back in like 2018, 2019, where we felt like we couldn't say that anymore. It was the only way I could describe it is that God starts to pull up your roots. It's almost like where in your mind you're so secure and you're so sure that this is where God wants you to be. Suddenly you're not quite sure. You start questioning those things again. And like Lou was just saying about the house, we got to the point where we thought, right, we're going to really commit ourselves into Hastings. We found a really great offer to extend our mortgage and to get some money out to kind of get a slightly larger house, because we were talking about maybe adoption or fostering. It was something was on our heart, still is. And so that we kind of went down this journey of releasing all this equity and basically doing some stuff on the house. And in the end, we just couldn't sell the house. It was just an absolute closed door.
Lots of closed
on
doors
on
to
the
things.
mortgage. That was when Lou actually left her teaching job to go into cleaning and to kind of seek after God, and to kind of really pray into our next season. And what we found is every time we kind of pushed a door that was on this trajectory to going on church planting, it was so easy. Whereas when we tried to plant ourselves in Hastings, it just got increasingly more difficult. So whether it was jobs, whether it was the house. So for example, once we decided, okay, God, you're gonna, we're going to be obedient and we're going to go. We don't know where that is. We managed to sell the house within a day, I think. We sold the house over the asking price because we decided to go. And there was a number of things like that lined up that we just thought, wow, this is just it's so amazing how God makes it so easy in some ways when you know that you're following the right way.
One of the clearest steps along that journey was all three of our children had quite a few food intolerances, allergies, and they required sort of special food, especially food that you could just buy in the UK, and we're aware we probably couldn't get anywhere else. And so that was a concern of ours. We were like, God, you've told us we're going to be going to a different nation. Like, how does that work?
But they're also under consultants at
the hospital.
Yeah, they're under
consultants, yeah. So it was over COVID time, and it was just a really mundane morning. I think I was just having quiet time with God, and I just got really challenged again to sort of be like, I pray for my kids, but I haven't prayed for their allergies for so long, because you know what it's like with life. You just keep plodding on. You just accept what you've got, and you just keep going. And I just had such an encounter with the Holy Spirit, and I felt a rise of faith to pray for our eldest child first of all. And basically what happened is God healed her, and I spoke to her about it, and I said, I really feel like God's healed you of your stomach problems, and do you want to try it? She always went on about trying cheese, so I was like, do you want to try a cheese sandwich? Anyway, went through the next day, and she was absolutely fine. So I was like, yes, God. And then I was like, hang on, I can't have one of my kids healed and then not the others. I was like, come on. And we just started praying for the other two. And just felt the next day that God had sorted it all out. And I gave them ice cream for breakfast, didn't I? Because dairy was one of the things that they couldn't tolerate. And that was it, wasn't it? So God basically healed them of those things that were a concern for us in the flesh. And it was just another step of his fatherly hand leading us into something that was unknown. And I think that was the real beginning of that personal journey with Christ, outside of what we've been used to within such a tight church community. Both of us have been brought up in Christian homes. I think for us it was a real family.
And I think people look at what we've done and say, like, man, that is such a big faith step. And in a way, maybe it is, but actually it's just another step in a whole load of smaller steps up to that point. So when I was saying about Lou, for example, giving up her work as a teacher to go, and she just did some cleaning. But at that point, it was like, well, we're going to be short of, was it £600 or £700 every month? Like, we don't know if this is even wise. And we're weighing up.
But we had faith for it for some reason.
Yeah.
We were like, okay.
And there was a bit of a deadline with the way that the terms work in school, and we had to give her notice in. And we thought, right, God, you're going to have to make it really clear in these next 2 or 3 days, because we'll either have to hand the notice in or not. And then literally through the post, we ended up with a check for exactly the same, for the right amount for that first month.
No one knew, did they?
And no one knew at all. It was just something we had been praying about. And our response was, when you sorted out the first month, you'll sort out the rest, you know.
Yeah,
and that was just that one step. And then, like I said, with the house and the mortgage, I remember going back up to the bank with the mortgage advisor and saying to, her name was Zoe, just saying, look, I know you factored in all this money with this calculation, but actually we've decided that my wife, she's going to stop working, so you have to recalculate it. And again, she just said, well, in that case, we can't lend you anything. and it's one of those things that you kind of came out of the bank in the flesh, you'd be like really gutted and disappointed, because we actually ended up going on a much higher rate interest and paying a lot more for a lot less money than what we would have done if we'd just gone in and signed on the dotted line, if you like. But spiritually, I walked out of the bank and I felt like the whole sky opened, and God was because there was an element of integrity in there, and there was also just an element of faithful obedience. Like, are you going to step out in obedience in these smaller things because there's something of it's almost like muscles. You build up your muscles.
Yeah.
And there's something of faith muscles that actually, as you step out in those smaller things, it builds up an ability when those harder things come along to say, well, you've been faithful in that, and you were faithful in that, and you healed our girls, and you provided that money. So yeah, absolutely, you're faithful.
Genuinely, the coming, it didn't feel big. Like
No.
it really didn't.
God gives you faith to do the things that he calls you to do. So when people say, oh man, I couldn't do that. Well, truth
No,
is,
we couldn't.
we wouldn't have in our own strength, but actually anyone could if God calls them to do it. Because I think there's an element where God calls you to do something, he gives you the grace and he gives you the faith to be obedient to it. Does that make sense? So I think
in our weakness, he's made strong, and it really does. It just showed them it's like, no, it's all God. Like he really has led us.
yeah. And then, that's not even just talking about things like the prophetic words that we had
it's
and
really
the numerous
clear.
conversations with people. So we chatted to the apostolic guys in Newground. We talked to, obviously, the eldership team. In fact, it was coming back from the conference in Liverpool one time.
Elders and wives.
Yeah, the elders and wives, whatever they call it. And so we were there having the meeting, and it was actually on the train on the way home from that conference. It was the first time that me and Lou said to the eldership team, guys, I don't think we could be factored into the next 5-year plan of where Kings is going, because I don't think we're going to be there. And that was the kind of the start, really, of us then journeying with the prophetic, really asking, well, God, what does this mean then? What does it mean for the church? What does it mean for the venue that we're leading? What does it mean for where we're going to go? And we've got pages and pages and pages of just prophetic words from people that we know and people in-house, but also people that don't know us and people that are outside of our church that had no idea what was going on, but just sent and gave prophetic words which are really clear in direction, that meant that by the time we got on that plane to come to the Philippines, we had 100% certainty, we had zero doubt that we were doing the right thing and that we were going in the right place. And that gives you a real assurance, when things go really difficult, and they are difficult and they are hard, but when you go through those hard times, knowing that you're in the place where God wants you to be is much better than being somewhere where God isn't necessarily calling you to be. I remember having a conversation with Dale, and he said, it is a big thing to go, but he said, staying when God wants you to go is also a very big thing. And I think that's true. I think that really resonated with us.
It would have felt like pure disobedience at that point.
At that point, when it feels like you would be disobedient if you didn't go, actually that really does, that's quite a motivator when you think, okay, we'd rather be uncomfortable but in where God wants us to be than to sit and be comfortable but not be obedient to where he's calling us to be.
And I think he's just really just even living here for 3 years, there's so much of our life that we didn't think, that we thought we would lose, that God has just almost put that cherry on top of being like a father does to his child. It's like, I'm just going to gift you this and gift you that. So like a lot of the things that we thought we'd have discomfort in, we have that comfort. And I think we've just learned so much about his character, haven't we? Because I think he's all knowing and he knew our future. And so some of the things that we've had to battle through, genuinely, I don't know if it's just as a parent or as a woman or as a human, it's like, I don't think I would have coped if those things were that on top of it as well. Like if we had our kids' allergies to still contend with, it would have been another thing that would have made it just like, man, I can't do it. So he's just,
and he speaks through the kids as well. I think this is something that for anyone who's thinking about missions, like, it's a family thing. God hasn't just called Lou, he hasn't just called me, he's called all 5 of us. Because all 5 of us count the cost, and all 5 of us get to enjoy the blessing of what it is to partner with God on mission. So even so, Bethan, our eldest, I mean, she must have been probably 8 or 9 at the time. Yeah. And she just said, I think we're going to be moving to the Philippines.
That was before we told her.
And that was before we even spoke to them. And you just think, how is this that, like, an 8-year-old, she just happened to be watching something about the Philippines, which was completely unrelated to us, unrelated to anything at all. And she just said, I think we're going to move to the Philippines. And you think, wow, it's amazing how God does speak even through our children.
But I think that's been incredible as well as we've journeyed, because not only am I able to remind her of how God's personally spoken to her, but I've also been able to use how God has spoken to us personally to reinforce when those fears step in. And obviously kids have a lot of fears in general, and it's our job to point them towards Jesus and say, well, you know, he's promised this. Might not be now, but like he's for you. Like this is the journey that he has set out for you. But it's been so much more grounded and real for them. I think so much of what we teach our kids about God's character or living out life as a Christian, I don't think we do a lot of those things in our day-to-day life in general, because of the, you know, the busyness of it, or how culture is, you know, how society goes. And for us being here, we came at the end of COVID. We came during COVID. The kids weren't allowed out of the house for another couple of months, were they? Yeah. So it was really like thrown in the deep end. And so when they've lived bits of that, you're able to just, those things become a lot more real, and we're able to say, look, taste and see that the Lord's good. Like, this is what we have. So like, we're able to soak up those things about Jesus' character that I don't think we would have really fully appreciated and absorbed if we were still living that, you know, that hamster wheel life that it's so easy to slip into, right?
Life does feel like a hamster wheel sometimes. It's amazing. I mean, so much of what you've said is just so incredible. There's so much there, isn't there? From healings to prophetic words to miraculous provision. And even, you know, your concept about it would be more costly to be disobedient. You realize that Paul's language of being bond servants or slaves of Christ is quite accurate to describe what it feels like as a Christian sometimes. It's just absolutely amazing. Like, and I love how the Lord as well, just whenever he kind of uproots a plant, he's very tender, and he does it carefully, but he does it decisively, and he then knows exactly what he's going to do and where he's going to plant you, even when you don't know. And I guess you find yourselves just trusting God for the ride. Do you kind of go, okay, I know you're doing something, but that initial, I think we're leaving, to I don't know where we're going, that people talk about liminality, that liminal space where you're in between something. It's quite an unsettling, disturbing time for people, particularly those of us who like to know exactly how everything's going to pan out. Describe that experience for us a bit more as well.
Yeah, that liminal space, I think it was interesting. We went through a season where it felt like that. It felt like, okay, we're being pulled out, but we're kind of almost floating. Like the plant's been pulled out of the ground, and now we're just waiting to see where we're going to land. So therefore, there was a couple of things really. Obviously, we did it through prayer and fasting, which was quite a significant thing for us. I guess I'm kind of reminded, like Nehemiah, there's a sense of I'm practically going to go about and ask the king and write these letters and do this stuff, but then there's prayer and there's that kind of bit on the side. So I think for us, we did practical things, which was having a lot of conversations. So I remember speaking to all different kinds of people, about Netherlands to India to America to just anywhere that we had contacts, anywhere that we had relationships.
But it was COVID, so we couldn't really go anywhere.
It was all through Zoom calls. It was all through relationships that we knew, both within New Ground, outside of New Ground, locally, translocally, internationally. And then just through those conversations, there were some that were very clear, closed doors, and then some which kind of started to open up a little bit, and some which kind of caught our heart a little bit. So we started to pray for those places.
We're being quite intentional with our time, like having seasons of prayer and fasting if we felt like breakthrough was coming, but we couldn't sense it yet. And we did I think for me, I just discerned when to sit and wait and let him be proactive, and when to push doors and when to start being practically proactive. It was quite a unique journey. Well, I feel like we're still on that close contact with Jesus, but it was the beginning of something that was closer than I think we'd ever experienced before. Like, it just felt like he was like right next to us. So it just felt really clear. But
I suppose once you've experienced that, it's so sweet. You don't want to lose that closeness, that willingness to trust him and see him provide. There must be something just so enchanting and exciting, romantic about that kind of intimacy with the Lord. Is that?
Yeah, but I think I don't know. It's quite. I don't want to say like hyper spiritualized things, but I think sometimes people are waiting for like a sign in the sky, or they're waiting for something really clear. Now, we did have a couple of those kind of things where, you know, Philippines was mentioned, or like so with Bethan or other people just talking to us about the Philippines. But there's probably lots of things that were said to us or we felt in our spirit, which could have been here, it could have been anywhere, really. I think what it starts with is a sense of unsettling, a sense of we know that this isn't going to be forever. And I think that liminal space, I'd say that the vast majority of it, 80% of that liminal space was knowing that we were going, but not knowing where. And it was only in that last 15, 20 minutes of our journey, 15, 20% of that journey that we actually had an idea. So we were telling friends and family, God's calling us to go somewhere, but we're not quite sure where yet.
It definitely took
for a lot of that journey, for probably a good 18 months probably, until we had a real clear idea on where we were going to go. So I think, that was
a lot of faith. I think God gave me a really clear picture of, when he says like, he's a lamp to our feet. It felt like we literally had to step out in the dark before he showed us the next step. So it wasn't like he's lighting up the whole path. It was like, no, we got to step out. And then he's like, okay, this is the next bit and the next bit.
And it was like Abraham, I guess, go to the place that I will show you. There was a sense of, okay, we're stepping in obedience to some of these things, which were quite clear. They're not small. They're like, actually, no, we're going to make decisions on jobs, and we're going to make decisions on houses, and we're going to make decisions that actually are almost like we're not going back, even though up to that point we still hadn't had a firm idea on where we were going. So that was that kind of liminal space, really, I think. In answer to your question about our personal walk with Jesus, I think once we arrived in the Philippines, the culture here really helped embed that sense of like, nothing is really in your control here in terms of culture is like, to us when we first arrived, didn't make much sense. And little things like, you can't ever expect things to be a certain way. So if you think something's open, it might be open, it might not be. You have to go there, and sometimes it's open, sometimes it's not. And so that sense of like just not being in control of stuff really helped trigger something to rely on Jesus. So especially for our children and as parents, I remember it, I'm still living this out, but with them, it's like you're sat in a place with them and you're explaining, like they're working through disappointment, or you're talking about, how we're not able to change what's happening. But what comes out of that journey is a sense that you're able to show them who Jesus is and pull him into your situation. I said to Bethan a few times, like, I can't change what's going on, but Jesus can. Like, he can either change the situation, he can bring you peace, and you're pulling his character into their real world. And I think what we hadn't done so much before coming here is we fix things very, very easily, don't we, as humans? Like, and we often have privileged lives to be able to do so. So for us, it was like, my child's upset, I'm going to sort that out, or this is going to be late, so I'm going to change this. And it's just being in this culture just triggered something in our hearts of like, it's actually quite exciting not to be in control. It's actually quite exciting to be like, God's got to step in, otherwise we're in trouble. So that reliance on him has just tasted so good, hasn't it? Like for 3 years. And maybe it's interesting, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, it's not that once you actually go, it's not once you get on the plane, it's like, oh, there's all the confusion's all finished and it's all clarity and it's all right, we're going to go. It's actually just the beginning, if I'm honest. If it, like when you get here, then it's like, okay, so what now? You've done the obedient thing, you started on this journey like Abraham, and it feels like you're still kind of walking one step in front of the other without really having an idea on where the final destination is. And I think that has been our journey very much, is one of, this is a continued journey of just trusting him for the daily thing.
Yeah, it certainly hasn't gotten easier. I know people probably won't want to hear that if they're starting a big thing in following Jesus' call. But although it hasn't got any easier, it's almost like our joy our joy has increased because we've had to rely on him, and our faith has increased because we've had to rely on him. And it's shaped us so uniquely that actually, although in the physical it's harder and there's lots of things that we still battle through, it feels more of a, this is what life's about. It feels more of a like, I don't want to sit in comfort and think about what I want to do in life anymore. I want to just keep listening to his voice.
That's good. Yeah, you realise, don't you? This is what he called us for
Yeah,
discipleship, to follow him. Um,
yeah.
by the way, do you live by an airport by any chance?
Yes, did you hear
Yeah, I
I
guess
don't
something?
live there
you've
anymore.
lived there
We
so long, you obviously can't hear it. It
uh,
sounds like you're pretty close to where the aeroplane lands.
It goes right over the, yeah, it just goes right over where
I
we live. Yeah.
sometimes wake up at 4 a.m. thinking it's like the end of the world. I'm like, oh yeah, it's just a plane.
No,
It's just,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm still here.
We're right on the flight path. Yeah.
well, I guess if things get really bad, at least you're close. You can always jump on a plane. So yeah, you talked about the kind of the faith-filled obedience, or I love how you describe that kind of incremental steps of just obedience. It's our lifestyle as Christians, and so this just feels like a natural next one. And we're starting to talk now then about this new normal, what it's like, where yeah, the confusion doesn't dissipate. There's still uncertainty, and some of the then things you have to learn. I guess moving from the West to the East, one of the most obvious ones must be not just the language barrier, but the huge cultural differences. Um, that to many people is just overwhelmingly scary, thinking it feels like a whole other world out there. Tell us a bit about how you've navigated some of that.
Well, it does feel like a whole nother world to
Yeah,
start with.
but it's one
But
that it's
yeah,
one. I know you're saying that it doesn't get any easier. It does in the sense of you become acclimatized, just like you would for climate. So it's 44 degrees or something today, right? We've got our aircon on, 28 degrees Celsius. That's very different, but your body does get acclimatized to
yeah,
it. Lou's wearing jeans now, whereas when we came, we thought that's crazy. But in the same way, when you get to a different culture, when you get to a different language, when you get to different food, cuisine, all of that changes. And you do acclimatize. You do, even if you don't necessarily have the palate for that type of food, you acclimatize to the smells and the senses and those kind of way of eating. And you do get acclimatized to hearing the language and experiencing and learning certain things and understanding certain things. So it does get easier in some ways. I think maybe what Lou's talking about is the being being a foreigner, being an alien in a different context, is something where we don't feel necessarily like this is fully home. And what's really strange is that when we went to visit the UK in the summer, we got back and we didn't feel particularly home there either for a lot of the time, because you end up acclimatizing to a different culture and then you find yourself in a bit of a middle ground where you feel like you're not quite home here and you're not quite home there, because your values and the things that you do and the way that you operate have to change. And so it's been an interesting journey of acclimatizing and getting used to those different things. Even when it comes to things like sharing the gospel, Jez, it's really interesting.
yes, different.
We are so used to guilt, culture, right and wrong. Whereas here, because it's an honor shame culture, interestingly, there'll be someone that would have no qualms at all about doing something in our eyes which would be wrong, if it means that it saves their family from shame. If it means that it brings honor to their family, that they would do that. So different examples might be, you'll have someone who just won't turn up to work. And you think, oh, that's not quite right, we wouldn't do that. But they don't want to have the shame of saying, actually, I don't want to work here anymore. So they just won't turn up. And then the following day, oh yeah, no, I'll be there. But then they won't turn up. And you would end up with a series of those. And it's only then when we spoke to friends of ours that were from here, they said, oh no, they just don't want to work there anymore. But they won't have that conversation or say, actually, I'm not sure if this is working out for me. I'm not sure if I need to have a tweak or change in my work. They just won't turn up, because there's something of, I don't want to bring shame on you and I don't want to bring shame on myself. That's just a little silly example, but those kind of things happen all the time. And so that, you're just kind of adjusting to that. So when it comes to sharing the gospel, it was interesting. We did like an alpha course, and we had a good number of people turn up. And for our first week, we actually did Who is Jesus? Everyone knew who Jesus was. Everyone knew why they died. Why he died.
Okay.
Everyone would say, well, he died because he's the Son of God and he died for my sin. They'd say all of that. Now, in a Western context, we'd say, man, salvation has come to this house. But here, they know it all, but there's no relationship, there's no connection there. So it's only when you start talking about the context of shame in an honor and shame culture that you start to really get their hearts and they start to understand. So you start saying, well, imagine the fact that we've been created and designed, actually we got God's name. taken on his nature, his very image of God was put on us. Imagine the shame when we basically take that image and we put it into our own image, or we basically destroy that image. And then imagine the shame of Jesus on the cross. It's not just that he took our sin, but actually he took our shame. And these kind of things are things that I'm having to relearn in my own gospel narrative, because I've been so used to saying and describing the gospel in one way that it's only in a culture where it's an Eastern culture that you start to learn that that doesn't wash. People know that, but they're still not saved. They still don't fully understand it. Yeah. So you start to try and talk and communicate them in their language, if you like, of kind of Eastern language of honor and shame. And suddenly it clicks. And suddenly you start thinking, oh, okay, I understand this. In a different way.
And like here, God is everywhere in terms of like big internet companies with billboards, there'll be Bible verses on there.
Yeah.
Or if you get into every taxi, they'll be more than willing. Like if you were to say to them, can I pray for you or with you? They'd be like, absolutely, like guaranteed. And so that was such a shift in what we were used to in the UK, where in general, I might be generalizing, but people like to sort of stick to their own, like you stick to your beliefs and I'll stick to mine. Don't sort of come into my life with your beliefs. And me being quite a shy person in general with other people, especially people I don't know, being in this culture has shifted something in me that actually it's allowed me a really safe platform to be a lot more bold, because people are expecting me to talk to them about Jesus. Because I'm a Westerner, and I think a lot of those, if you see any Westerners here, a lot of them are missionaries. So it's almost like that association. So I think there's that. And it gives you a platform to almost like a safe place to practice, if that makes sense, which is what we talk about a lot in churches in terms of this is a safe place to, practice the prophetic and sort of practice your testimony and things like that. So it's just made me, what I sometimes would have seen as quite scary to do, to be like, hey, it's giving me life now. It's like I get excited about how can I like help disciple this person, and how can I, talk about Jesus. Whereas if I'm honest, although I've been a Christian most of my life, in the UK, because it's not a common practice day in, day out, like with everything that you're doing, it sort of gets pushed to the back of your mind. It's sort of like, I know I need to be showing this person Jesus's love and sharing the gospel with my words, but everything else just gets thrown on top, and then it just gets shifted. So yeah, long story short, I think cultural change has helped us really in so many ways.
Yeah,
as well.
And maybe even just the pace of life.
Yeah,
like it is slower here. Like I think partly because of climate, that's partly because
efficiency isn't high on the radar. Whereas
it's so for us here, we do have a much slower pace of life. I remember when I got here, I thought, right, okay, well, I need to go down to the immigration office. That'll take me a couple of hours.
That's enough, didn't it?
Yeah, that'll take me a couple of hours, and then I'll go into the shop and I'll buy a few things, and then I'll go to the bank and da-da-da. And in the UK, I can kind of plan my time and think, well, I could probably get all of that done by 1 o'clock. Here, I go to immigration, I'll still be there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I've been there for 8 hours. And suddenly it's like, oh, that goes the plan for that day. And then I'd go to the shop to buy that particular thing for that tap fitting, and then find, oh, we don't have those in today, sir. It's like, oh, okay, no, of course you don't. You
tend to do like one thing in a day. Like
yeah, I went to buy a washing machine. So Jez, this is just one silly example. I went to buy a washing machine. Now, we're quite, we're quite well travelled. We've been to lots of different places, been to lots of different cultures and lots of different countries. I've never tried to buy a washing machine in a different culture, right? I've never gone to pay a gas bill in a different culture. And it's these things that when they hit you, they really hit you hard, because although you think that you're quite well travelled, it's when you're in those kind of cultures and these things happen that you realise, oh, I'm really in a different place. So I went to buy a washing machine. I thought, okay, I'll go in there. Within 5 minutes, I decided which one. I just said, I'll have that one there. And then they went to get a brand new one in a box. They unpackaged the box. They untook all the cellophane out. They plugged it in, and they insisted on it doing a full wash, a full cycle. Well, I had to stand there waiting while they did this full cycle. And then once it'd done a full cycle, they then repackaged the whole thing. Drain it. They repackaged the whole thing, put it in the box, they got stuff. and then I'm good to go. And this is like, okay, so 2.5 hours later, I'm now good to go with my washing machine. And you think, why would you do that? It's just what I do. Every electronic thing. I went to buy
All right,
I went to
you've
buy
got a whole load of stories.
no, but I went to buy a light bulb. They'll take the light bulb out of the box, they'll take it to a testing station, they'll put the connectors on there, they'll say, it works, sir. Yes, it works. They'll put it back in the box. Well, I went on my first time to buy 18 light bulbs because there wasn't a single light bulb. Well, you can imagine it took me like an hour and a half, 2 hours for them to do all of this whole thing. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not quite sure what I'm saying. What I'm saying, in terms of the culture shock and those kind of things, they do really. We had a phrase very early on where we said, okay, it's not wrong,
it's just
different. And actually, you can come to a different place with a mentality. If you're not careful, you can come with a mentality that you're right, and that this culture is wrong. As though like we're able to come and fix something. As though you putting on a full cycle on a washing machine is not a very good way of running a business, but that's just what they do here. And so for us, we can come along and say, well, this isn't right. And instead we've had to try and change our mindset, say, no, this is a different culture. Who are we to come into a different culture and say that they're wrong? We're not.
They've got different value to what we would have maybe come into for the reasons they do things. And I think we have to respect that. And I think if you come into any country with the mindset that you know better, then you're going to become very frustrated very quickly. So that was quite a stripping process for us.
I guess part of the challenge is when you go as a Christian mission type person, you're going because you think they need something that you have, which is the good news of Jesus. So there's always inherent to your very reason for being there a sense of I've got something good for you that you need. But then it must be very easy for that to tip into and expose some of the kind of just general colonial mentalities, ideas anyway, that you think, not only have I got the gospel, I'm also a Westerner and I'm British, we're wealthier, we've, whatever. How have you expunged some of that from your soul?
Well, that is so noticeable from the very minute you get off the plane. There is a sense, if you're white, most people here, if they're white, they're Americans, although there's not many around. But there would be a sense that you know better, that you're somewhat better than everyone else. Like we wouldn't say this, but this is what generally the Filipinos here, that's what they would think. They would think that as though you're somehow in an elitist way. And I think that it does go down to kind of colonialism. It does go to this kind of white supremacy thing, which you don't want it. You don't like it. But nevertheless, it's ingrained into the culture. So I think certainly for the Philippines here, it would have been the colonization of the Spaniards and all that. But there is definitely that type of thing that you're almost having to fight against from the start. You're not actually, I guess what I'm saying is you're not starting at zero. You're actually starting at a minus number. And it almost like you're actually having to try and heal wounds and trying to get yourself to a place where actually you're on an equal footing with someone else, instead of them feeling as though you're 10 rungs up the ladder, if you know what I mean. Our starting point was very much like, we're here to learn. We're here to learn, we're here to love, we're here to serve. How can we help? And I think that's sometimes the best place to start. Instead of we've come with a message or we've come with an answer, actually we've just come with loads of questions. We'd love it if you can teach us. We'd love it if you can help us understand. And that's probably the best kind of stance, I think, when you go to a different culture, is we are the aliens. We're the ones that are the minority now. Help us learn, help us understand.
Humility is a good platform to start.
Talk to us a bit about the impact. Not only is there the cultural difference, there's the prejudices and assumptions about the cultural differences as well that go into play, that actually, like you said, make it harder for you to establish relationships on an equal footing, all of which makes me realize and kind of get an insight into just how lonely it must be to build some of that, or hard it must be to build some of those kind of just equal, I think you call it soul level relationships in one of your recent emails you sent out, soul level friendships. We think, we get each other. That must be quite hard. Share with us, if you wouldn't mind, some of your just journey relationally with being there.
I think Alid and I are quite different. I need a lot of connections and communication, and friendships were sort of high up for what I felt like I needed. So in coming, it felt quite isolated because that was sort of stripped away. But in terms of rebuilding friendships and relationships, especially with Filipinos, it's been quite a hard thing for me, not necessarily because of cultural difference and things like that, but because of what Alid was saying about if I'm going, for example, if I'm going to pray with someone at church and I'm just going to come alongside them, and like Alid said, it's almost, I might be generalizing, but for a lot of Filipinos, it's that they think that I've got something that they need, something that I can offer them that they're not able to do. Like I'm the one that can pray really well and something's going to happen from my prayer. And so not only do you have to adapt to that, you end up having to shift your whole level of how you can really grow friendship, because you don't want a friendship or a relationship to grow on, look what I can give you. I wanted to try and start on a level ground of hey, you've got something to give. Why don't you pray first? God's listening to your prayers just as much as he is mine. And that type of talk was really new to me. And for me, it started me on a journey of becoming a lot more encouraging, because I was having to encourage people that, no, you've got something, God's here, you're here, you pray out, you sing, and that type of thing. And so that has been a hindrance for us, I think, for me maybe, to build on things that we would expect out of a friendship. Sort of you don't expect someone to be better than the other person. So that's been sort of maybe the platform for it being more difficult to build on those relationships. And things like culturally in the evening, in the UK, we would have done most things in the evening, right? And here, their commitment to family, and they work incredibly long hours. And, you don't get to do those types of things in the evening, and everyone goes to bed very early because they're up very early because it's just so hot. So you think it's something little, just time, but actually when you don't get time to build those relationships, it really is a cost. It's these aren't growing as much as you'd want them to.
Yeah, I mean, relationships just take time, don't they?
Yeah.
So we've obviously, having been at King's in Hastings for so many years, have got some very, very deep and very, very strong relationships.
Well, you've been there your whole life, haven't you?
Yeah, and those relationships cannot be substituted quickly. And so there's an element of time where just trying to build relationships. But yeah, with American or missionary families, you can build some relationships, but by the nature of what American missional mindset is, they're often here for a period of time, and then they have furlough and they go back to the US often. So we've had even a few quite good relationships that we've built up over the last 3 years. They've all gone now. So you're there in your own. And then with Filipinos, there's sometimes, because of need, because of poverty, you can try and start some relationships and friendships, and some of those within our church setting have been really healthy and really good. But then there's also an element of, well, if we've got a need, we know that you guys could meet that need because you have more money than we do, or you have more experience in this than we do. And that, it just makes it quite a difficult relationship to navigate, because you need to try and almost put those things in, those expectations in place. But yeah, I mean, definitely the biggest cost in coming here, without a doubt, has been relationship. It absolutely has been, more than
quite
anything
a grief-stricken journey.
It's been definitely the one that we've shed the most tears and had the most heartbreak over, is actually feeling very much like you're on your own, and feeling that you're very disconnected. And that actually works in our favour as a married couple, because actually it means, well, you kind of got each other. So having visited the UK in the summer and seeing so many people and catching up with so many friends, we kind of looked at each other and joked with each other and just said, well, it's you and me again, which is wonderful in so many ways, because we get to spend so much time working together and getting that quality time together. But you do definitely miss those relationships, family,
but even
friends.
It's okay to, it's recognizing it's okay to grieve those things, but it's also, it brings you into a new light of something. For me personally, my journey through this is, again, it points you towards your not only your need for dependency on Jesus, but your joy and delight in him that you wouldn't have got such a deep taste of before. Because when inevitably, as harsh as life is and of grief-stricken as life is for so many people, I think when you have things stripped away that you hold really maybe too tightly, or you just enjoy to have into your life, when those things are stripped away, there's no other option. There's no other option but to spend time with Jesus. And it's such a strange thing, because it's so beautiful to be pushed into that dependency. And for me personally, there's been a lot of things beyond like relationships, but for me, I personally have got quite a few like food allergies. And so what used to be, again, quite a important part of my life, like I love food, I love cooking, that I don't want it to sound dramatic, but like that's been stripped from my life. Like I don't delight in food anymore, because the food that I actually can eat, I don't really enjoy, and I don't get really access to a lot here. So this journey it's become quite clear that it's that balance of recognizing that God does allow you to walk through things, and so that you can become more dependent on him. So it's almost like fasting, right? It's like you take food out of the equation, and you're able to replace that time of eating with praying. And it's been very much like that, hasn't it? Where the things that we've had stripped away have just pulled us, I can speak for myself, but pulled me closer to relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, I think the risk is when we talk about this way, and like you're asking kind of questions which are drawing out some of the challenges and the difficulties, we wouldn't have changed this for the world.
No.
Like the blessing that comes out of pain
Beauty comes from ashes.
And desert places. Like, I mean, if you was to describe our journey, and I think I mentioned it to you, Jez, it almost feels like a kind of set of three scenes. There's almost like this scene one, which is calling, which is like pulling up roots and us saying, okay, we're obedient to go. The second one was going, this season and this kind of time that we've been here, and the actual obedience in going. But I think the third scene that we're walking into now is one of forming.
Yeah.
Actually, it feels like this part of the season, this part of the journey now is about God reforming us and correcting things that probably when we were in Hastings, we never would have seen or understood them. It's only when you're in a different culture, it's only when those things are taken away from you that you realize what is actually left. So for example, you know, I think earlier on you said about how God, when he pulls you up, is so gentle, but at the same time, our experience actually was one of real pruning. Like to think in where we were leading a venue. I was an elder at the church. We had different responsibilities and roles and all these titles and all this stuff. But what God does is that, okay, chop that, and we'll prune that, and we'll cut all that back until literally it feels like it's just your little stubby self. And God's like, right now I'm going to plant you over here. And when you get there, it's like, man, is this, what now? There's no people, there's no performance, there's no routine, there's no structure, there's no rotors, there's none of that. It was all completely gone. And it was like, well, it's just us now. Like, what do we do? Like, what is there left? And I think that is where the soil can get really fertile and ready for God to start planting in new things. Things that I think I was probably just too busy and probably running at a too frantic pace. And I think the volume of the world around us, there's so many voices in. It's not that we didn't hear God, obviously we did. And it's not that we didn't pray and do all those things. But I think sometimes I think Ruth Haley Barton had this thing in her book. She says most of us aren't living lives that set us up for hearing God. Most of us are just too, fanatically just busy going around doing stuff. And most of that stuff is very good. But actually what we've had, this experience here has been one of stripping all of that away. So that literally it's just left us.
And the clarity of God's voice is just so obvious. Like I can just hear him. It is like when you just walk out into a field and you're just like, you can hear the birds. Now, before you went into the field, the birds were still tweeting, but you just couldn't hear them because you weren't in that space where they're just right there.
And I think it's
So
just
it's beautiful, but it's
amazing.
yeah,
it's such God's grace in it, because
God's grace.
it's
Yeah.
quite difficult to change a wheel on a car when you're going down the hill at 30 miles an hour, which is kind of what it felt like. Whereas actually now it feels like actually we've been forced to stop, and it enables us to kind of look under the hood a bit and just say, okay, well, what are some of the things that God wants to process and do in us? What are some of the things that we're probably too
And
busy
in His
to...
grace, I think when you go through these things, like with anything in life, you're like, well, hey, what is this about? And then God, in His grace, has just dropped gentle reminders of things like prophetic words, where we've had all of these things, like, you know, a picture of a cheese plant, and it can take some significant hacking, and, you know, a car where it's had its whole bodywork stripped, and then you're like, okay, now you've got to start rebuilding it. And there's just masses of them. And so those clear, like how He's used the body, the church, to bring those words into our life and this journey, have just steadied us. When you think you're going through something, you're like, what God's doing, it's like, oh yeah, He's, that has been part of the journey. He said He was going to do that, or yeah, it's pulled us back again.
And I think
really
so.
sweet.
When we came to the Philippines, I think we came with with humility, but a sense of like, what are we going to be able to do for God here?
Yeah.
Whereas actually after 3 years, I think it's becoming more and more clear that actually God is saying, no, what am I going to be able to do in here, in our hearts? Actually, the Philippines, if you like, is the
Training
is the context, if you like, in order for God to do more stuff in us. And that is, yeah, I think I probably relate more in this season to Moses than I do to anyone else. So I think Abraham, in those early stages of, we're going to go to the place where God, where I will show you. But now in this season, I feel like we're in the wilderness for 40 years in preparation for something. And I wrote in my journal, there's two Moseses that went in Pharaoh's palace, but only one was going to be able to bring the people out. And the difference between the two is 40 years in the desert. It's this preparation time. And I feel like that is what we're doing now. We're in a place of reforming, where those things, those mindsets, those ideas, those philosophies, those things that we had before, it's when you get taken out of that context and you get to experience a different one that you say, okay, that is one way of doing it, and here's another way of doing it. And you start to reform and rethink some ideas that you maybe before was really certain on, and now it starts to throw some questions.
And you're asking God how He wants to do it.
yeah, you start to rethink something. So it's almost like kind of a silly picture, but it's almost like you're reversing the car and you think you've got loads of space. And it's only when you get out and you look, you think, well, that was a bit closer than I thought. I think there are things that, you know, we led with integrity, I served with integrity, but there's elements now when you come out, you kind of look behind the car and think, there's probably a few things that are a bit closer than what I thought. And it's only by God's grace, really, that He takes us out of that setting and puts us in this place in order to train and equip and help us to grow and to teach us things that otherwise we maybe wouldn't have known if we stayed where we were. Yeah,
It's
so
amazing.
It's been painful, and it's been a desert place, but some really good harvests come out of ground that have been ploughed. And it's not nice being in the ploughing, but you know that it's going to produce fruit. And I think that's the thing.
And you realise, don't you, as parents as well, so much of our lives are actually setting up our children to live. And even as Christian disciples of our parents, the things that you're investing into your children just through your example and journey together means that they are able to multiply. Whatever God does in you over 40 years, it's going to multiply in them over 5 or 6 years. And that's a large part of what He's called you to. Like you said at the beginning, you stressed that, like, He's called us as a family, not just as individuals and not just as a couple. But it is the sort of thing that a lot of people long for, to go on an adventure like this. But then it must be it must be a strange dynamic to realize, oh, I'm not actually here to do things so much as I'm here because God wants to do something in me. And then hopefully He can still do things in me. Like, it must be a strange dynamic. Like as much as what you're saying, He's doing stuff in you. You're there, well, I have come here to do things here though. What's that balance like?
Absolutely. And we are, you know, we're meeting on Sundays, we're doing lots of different projects and different things happening during the week. But I think the difference for me, Jez, is that I am, by default, I am a doer. And it was interesting. So a little while ago, I was listening to someone, Matt Chandler, it was in a conversation with John Mark Comer. He said this, and it really resonated with me. He said, "I find it easier to see myself as useful to God than to be loved or wanted by Him." And I think if we're not careful, we can see our value based on what we're doing or what we're able to do, what we're able to accomplish. And God has prepared good works for us to do. But if we catch ourselves seeing our value as based on those things, then that doesn't necessarily line up with biblical identity. So I think I was doing really good things back in Hastings, and they're all very good. I think if I'm honest, I probably took some of my value and my identity from what I was doing rather than just who I was. So now coming here, it's not that we're not doing, but I think what God has reestablished in our hearts is, even if you didn't do, you're still loved. Actually, I still want you for who you are, not just for what you can do for me. Does that make sense? Mm. And I think now what happens is your doing comes out of a place of being. And it comes out of a formation. The thoughts that are formed in my mind now are more, regardless of my performance today, I'm still loved. Whereas probably before, I would have still said those same things, but actually, I probably would have been very much coloured by views of man and my reputation and those things. Whereas now I'm feeling like more and more those things are being taken from me. And that's a painful journey, actually. It's a painful journey to have those things taken away from you. But it's only when those things get on the altar of your heart, it's only when you realise how painful they are when they go away, that you realise how much they probably had a place in your heart that they probably shouldn't have done.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I think, I mean, partly it's the Christian tradition that we're in as well. We are activists, we're mission types. We want to plant churches. We emphasize the importance of taking the gospel to all nations, and those are, making disciples of all nations. That's a central part of who we are as believers. But as you said, actually, God is the one who's out seeking and saving the lost. We're praying that He would bring His kingdom, and we're here actually to just partner with what He's doing in the first place anyway, which actually means it's important that we become the kind of people with whom God can partner. Because I love that illustration of going out into the fields, because we've turned down the noise of everything else and we're tuned into what He's saying, so that we become a lot more effective. We're a sharper tool in His hand. I can see how it really kind of helps take the strengths of who we are as a movement of churches, and helps kind of mitigate and sharpen some of the weaker aspects because of sometimes our overemphasis on activity. Well, guys, just as we this has been just truly inspiring and very moving. I can sense the spirit all over. There's so much of what you're saying, and it's clear from the things you've said, just the wisdom that God has taught you and put in you over the last 3 years. I'm sure was there already, but now is there in spades. Why don't each of you just kind of share a kind of final reflection before we draw this conversation to a close? What would you like? What's on your heart or mind as we finish?
I think anyone that has church planted before, or about to start it, I think it's remembering that doing that we were talking about, you're doing it, but it's just obviously on a smaller level. And it's remembering that when you go into these things, that ultimately with anything that we do as humans, God cares and looks at the heart, right? And so anything you do, whether it's for show or whether it's to, whether you're just talking to your daughter about Jesus, it's like He cares about what you do in the secret place. He cares about your personal relationship with Him, and that you're honoring Him and glorifying Him through everything that you do. And so as frustrated as things have been for at times for us or anyone that's done church planting, I think it's just remembering that Jesus sees those little things. He sees when you're discipling your kids. He sees when you're walking alongside someone and weeping with someone, like He did when they've just lost their partner. And I think that's church, isn't it? And I think when you have often the things stripped away that were the big doings that we've culturally sort of developed into quite a lot in our churches, when those are stripped away, it's really beautiful to just see Jesus at work, and then like little places. And I think it's been a gift to be exposed to that again, but to be part of it, because that is building church. And I think, yeah, in a nutshell, this journey, whether we're in a season of stillness, it is ultimately about our own relationship with Jesus. And are we going to be obedient to his calling? Are we going to have whatever that calling is, whether it's to go across the other side of the world, or whether it's to stay with a sick parent and help them through the last days of their life? Whatever you're doing, it's as long as it's glorifying Jesus and that you're doing what he's asked of you in that season. I think that's what it's about, isn't it? And I think I just see it as a gift that I've been reminded afresh that that's what it's about, and that I'm just falling in love with him again. I think we are as a family, we are as a church, and yeah, I just hope that he continues to use us in those ways, really. Yeah.
Amazing.
Anything to add?
I don't know. I think we are more powerful than we realise. We've got the Word of God and we've got the Spirit of God. And I think being here, sometimes when you get taken out of a different context, you do, it's almost like a fresh start in a way. Sometimes you can just have a go at doing some stuff that maybe you would have been nervous of doing before. But I think that's my encouragement, is for anyone who's listening, it's like you've got the Word of God, the Spirit of God. You're more powerful than you realise. You have the ability to unlock a key of blessing in someone's life today. Would otherwise not have had that, and it's because you have the kingdom of God in you. And I think I'm learning more and more that actually this isn't just about church planting so much as it is about reaching the kingdom. This is about kingdom extension. So Jesus says he's going to build his church, but we're called to go and partner in the kingdom, to partner what he's doing. And I think all of us as Christians, wherever we are, wherever we're called to, as long as we're living in faith, like walking in step with the Holy Spirit, as it says in Galatians, living faith-filled obedience, ultimately we have the opportunity to change lives and to do some incredible things. Not because of our power, but because of his power working through us. So yeah, it is exciting. It's much more exciting living a life in faithful obedience with him than trying to just live a comfortable life in the world and miss it. And
that's really, really good. Guys, it's so incredibly inspiring. It's been such an encouragement to me, and I'm sure will be to so many, to hear your story and to glean from some of the things that you've learned over the past 3 years and beyond. Thank you so much. How can people support you or get in contact with you and encourage you should they want to?
That's a very good question. I mean, we do have a newsletter. So maybe, Jez, I'm not sure if there's a way of us putting the link to the newsletter on the podcast, and people can sign up.
We'll do that.
You can just join us in praying.
We write them every couple of months, and it's often either by written or by video. And I think in there is family news and things, but it also gives really clear prayer points. So I think the biggest thing that people can do is not only
join us in praying,
join us in praying for the expansion of his kingdom. Like Davao Live is the church that we're working with here, and they're doing great things as a team, as a unit, and we just would appreciate prayer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been such a treat.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Well, I've just finished recording the conversation with Lou and Aled, and I thought I'd just share some reflections. I know the word inspiring is easy to throw around, but I genuinely think it's the word that fits best for the conversation. Talking with them and hearing how God led them to leave in the first place, and then some of the challenges and journey that they've been on since then. It's provocative, isn't it? You know, I think as they were speaking, I found myself just feeling jealous, not necessarily to move to the Philippines, but for that level of intimacy with Jesus, the sense of his voice and knowing him close, being aware that they are sold out to him and his purposes, raising a family in a way that's devoted to Jesus. It feels like their life is entirely Christ-centered, which of course is what all of our lives are like as Christians, but there are people in the body of Christ who are doing things in response to Jesus's voice and call that are meant to be like provocations to the rest of us. And the provocation isn't so much to, come on, leave where you are, go half the world away and go plant churches in the Philippines or wherever it may be. It may be that, but I think for most of us, the provocation is come closer to him, draw nearer to him, say more yeses to him, make more room for him, turn down the noise in your life so you can hear him speak. I think for most of us, that's what it is. You know, as they were speaking, I had this phrase come to mind that I wrote down in my notes, that they're half the world away, but they're closer to home than ever before. If home is Christ, and not just going to heaven to be with him, but knowing heaven here, knowing Christ with us, that's home, isn't it? And actually, wherever we go, he says, I'll be with you. You know, I will never leave you nor forsake you, which means that although of course we long for things, we grieve for things, we become homesick for places and people, but home in its truest sense is always with us. And learning to draw near to him and give him more of our time and attention and faithful obedience is what it means to live a fulfilled life. That is the good life, isn't it? Trusting him. I've been talking with Matt Hatch recently about discipleship for this podcast, and he talks about the importance of disciples are those who encounter Christ, are surrendered to Christ, and live obediently to Christ. And it's a cycle that we go through. And he quotes from people around the world who often say that the difference between the Western church and church planting movements is just that one word, obedience. Are those of us in the Western church obedient to the call of Christ? If he tells you to leave, are you willing to go? He may not be calling you to leave, but he's certainly calling you out to him in the wilderness, perhaps in more time for attention, for silence, for solitude, for Sabbath. He's inviting you to listen again to his still small voice and discern what he's calling you to do in this next hour, in this next week, in this next month. Not because he needs you, but because he wants you, he loves you. You might be useful to him, you might not be, but your value isn't dependent on your usefulness. It's dependent on his love for you. Well, I hope you enjoyed being with us today for another episode of the Life and Leadership podcast. I look forward to bringing you more conversations that are inspiring and provocative, and they help you thrive as a follower of Jesus wherever you are and whatever you're going through. God bless you. See you again soon. Bye-bye.